I've been asked to speak a little bit about sustainability of employee ownership and employee ownership for the long run. And one of the ways to do that is to have a tight community where you're actually not just maximizing your own definition of success, but learning heavily from each other. Today is going to be a great example of that. You have some great formal presentations, you have some great panelists, you have a lot of good information. If the other 12 are any indication, when you leave today, you're going to be really excited and, in fact, maybe even a little confused on which great thing to go back and work on first. Don't get so confused that you don't do anything. You know, pick one at least and get that done, and then follow up with the people that you've met. Use the informal time to really kind of build those relationships. So sustainability is partly coming from community. And you can build community both within your company, and that's important, but build community beyond corporate boundaries, and it will help you. I think that I'll just share a little vignette about myself, which was I did get up to Vermont in '92. I'm a flatlander and always will be, unfortunately, coming from Connecticut. But I voted with my feet and moved a young family up to Vermont. It was termed by a family member as career suicide at the time, to leave a very prosperous and populous part of the country and come up to the Upper Valley. But we moved up there because of lifestyle. This is a great place to live and work. And we moved up there to be part of a values-driven company. And surprise, surprise, my take on King Arthur is we have attracted lots of other, and you and your companies have attracted a lot of other employees who want to work in values-driven companies. As much as that seemed like career suicide to one person who now feels like 20 some odd years later that it actually was okay. The Rethink Health and the healthcare innovation thing is terrifying. It's quite something. This is the time of year, besides the VEOC conference, when a lot of commencement talks are given. And I have a weird hobby of occasionally, combing through some of the commencement talks. Some of them are pretty good. And one of them had a quote about, if your dreams don't at times terrify you, you're not dreaming large enough. So one of the things I'm currently dreaming of is that we somehow get ourselves out of this health and wellness and healthcare mess. And I'm learning a lot about that. So most of my experience with respect to employee ownership has been at King Arthur, and I assume most everybody knows about King Arthur, but 30 seconds on it. King Arthur is the premier provider of baking products, education, and inspiration, and through those things really seeks to create a community of bakers who share the joy of baking. Because guess what? You don't need to just bake for yourself and eat all your cookies. I mean, okay, hands up. We've all done that once or twice. It kind of comes out of the oven, they smell good, you're hanging around the house, and they're gone at the end. But you're also kind of putting yourself and your love into what you do and then sharing it with others. That's the 30-second version of King Arthur. It's over 200 years old. It was founded in Boston. It was moved up to Vermont in a prior generation, back in the 80s, by the fifth generation owner, who was the seller of the company to the ESOP over the course of about 10 years in 3 small chunks, and grew successfully up here from, I think at the time they moved up, about 6 employees, less than a dozen, to over 300 now, I assume. How much? 346. Wow. Are you guys watching the expenses and making sure you have enough? Sorry. It's hard to let go sometimes, right? But that is also a key sustainability lesson, is knowing when to pass on and let go for the next group. All right, so that's King Arthur in a nutshell. Bees and benefit corporations. It was alluded to. This is part of what we viewed was our sustainability strategy. And let's do bees first, because that's what came first. King Arthur is a founding bee corporation. To do that, you have to pass a test. You have to go through a scoring mechanism. And the reason, bless you, the reason that I think this ties to sustainability is, think about like living systems and evolution and things. what's going to survive over millions and millions of years is the systems, the organisms, and I'm arguing the organizations, which adapt well, which are suited for their environment, which perform well. And we have been, as a society, overly focused on performing well financially. Yes, you've got to have a good business model. I remember in the early 90s, Nell Newman from Newman's Own kind of wagging a finger at the Expo crew who really wanted to go out and change the world, but oftentimes didn't value the financial bottom line. She said, if you guys go out of business next year, who's going to make the world a better place? So you definitely do have to have the financials right. But B corporations got serious about spelling out in some specificity what a balanced view of succeeding looks like. And if you do the right things for what I'm using some of their terminology now, workers and community and environment and all the different subscores that they have, I argued, and our board of directors agreed, that we would be increasing the probability that King Arthur would survive for another 200 years. So that sounds ridiculous. I mean, maybe to some of you. I mean, our planning, it's tough enough to figure out what, 2 years, 3 years down the road the budget's going to look like. But I think we used it not seriously that we're going to kind of get a point estimate for 198 years out and hit that sales number exactly right. It was more of a philosophy of it needs to be around for a long time. So these comments are a case study of one, but I don't think they're limited to a company that is 200 years old. I think it has some lessons for all of us. So if you haven't taken a look at B corporations and what those scorecards look like and what those things are, either come to the session later on today if you're able, or they've got a great website and you can go teach yourself some more about that. And then you can call me or a whole bunch of other Bs who actually are in Vermont, because just like employee ownership is a great way for Vermont to distinguish itself and grow the companies that are here, there are some wonderful B and benefit corporations in here as well, and they likewise have this sense of community and would welcome helping you figure that out. Benefit Corporation came next. This is a higher level, it's not a certification. The B Lab is a certification, third-party certification. Benefit Corporation is in the statutes of individual states. It's a legal distinction. And the things that attracted us to Benefit Corp, having already become a B Corp, was one, oh good, we get to use this scorecard for something besides just internally motivating ourselves and reporting out. But it's a requirement of Benefit Corporation. But Benefit Corporation also says, under certain circumstances, your board of directors may choose to look at stakeholder groups that aren't just the pure financial stakeholders. Now, more than a few of us in this room might be 100% employee-owned, and so then you kind of go, well, my financial stakeholders are my workers, are my owners, and you kind of go, this is kind of circular and stuff. But it actually gives some credence to looking at community, looking at suppliers, looking at customer needs, and really, the idea of an unsolicited offer and the possible future of, having somebody come in, swoop in, and buy the company, even if the company didn't want to sell, move the company, even if the employees didn't want to move, that would be a bad outcome. And it's not like we were fearful of it. It's not like it was on our mind all the time, but we had this big dream about what King Arthur could continue to grow into. And we thought there was a pretty good chance that some of these unsolicited scenarios would put a real kink in the works, would screw up the dream. So we placed into existence a series of defenses, I'll call them. They aren't nothing certain, but it's like, no, we think as the board of directors of this company that it's not in the best interests of the employee owners to sell. And we actually wrote a policy with get some good legal guidance on this to say exactly what the steps would need to be to go through that. So we wanted to stay in charge of our own future without and we're very aware of the risks, because you could kind of protect yourself and do poison pills and do all this stuff, but then where are the incentives for your team and your management to always succeed and strive? Sometimes these things have been put into place, and it gets to a culture of comfort in a bad sense, and people not striving, and then that's the beginning of not being sustainable, but kind of being down, sliding downhill. So you want some of this sustainability, but you also want some of that pressure, and I think that was really where kind of the culture of, which Tabitha talked about, which is the creativity and the engagement of all your employees really helps keep you on the ball. When we were about to go ESOP and we had kind of a ground floor meeting in 1995, and we pulled out, yes, there were stock pages that had prices of Vermont public companies back then, and taught everybody about price earning multiples for the seventh generations and the Ben & Jerry's and the various different public companies we had. You could actually get people thinking about, wow, I am an owner and I have a financial interest, and I can determine in my own sphere how this is going to help the whole company. The last one that I'd point out right now, specific to our defenses, were our customers, which sounds kind of funny, and I don't have the time to get really specific about it, but think of this. Or I'll share, so Applegate Farm was bought by the guys that make Spam. I shouldn't eat sausages that much, but I sometimes do. But I felt good about Applegate. I think I know something about that company and what they stand for. The merger hasn't gone through. I feel differently about Applegate now because of what I think about Spam and the company that might make Spam. Sounds silly, but it's an example of our consumers and our customers have senses of our companies and what we stand for in their minds. If we're clear in describing this to them, then we can also make sure that they help hold us accountable / cause it to not be looked at very seriously by a potential hostile acquirer, and we can remain independent. So, as if that were not enough, there are a whole host of other things that are normal for sustainability for any company, and we'll be talking about those later. Sarah's going to talk, and Cindy, I think, from King Arthur and others are going to talk about mentoring and leadership, cultivating leadership, and making sure that you've got the right crew to hand off to when it's time. Again, as Pat said, it's great to see that there are Generation Ys and others in here who we can hand off to. That's got to be in place. Great governance. So to oversee all this and to have things kind of baked into your corporate DNA and known to the people who are in charge of making those biggest decisions, your trustees if you're an ESOP, your directors if you've got a formal board, and then succession planning. It is a process, and you should be looking at it early and tweaking it and starting on it, and then it will go really smoothly. There was a book handed out 20 plus years ago. We actually used it for the transition of fifth generation to ESOP. It had nothing to do with ESOP. It was about just transitions and succession planning in general. The title of the book was The Last Test of Greatness, which is if you're a founder, if you've grown a company, your last test of being great is, are you doing a great job of getting the company that you've built and sweated over into good hands for the future. And then, of course, there's the interesting area, and there's a session on this by a national expert later, Judy Kornfeld. Then there's the interesting sustainability questions related to the math of valuation and growth and ownership. And we spent a lot of time at King Arthur looking at repurchase obligation. And this harks all the way back to my very first year in an ESOP and sharing a cab to get to the airport. And who do I share a cab ride with but Judy Kornfeld? By the end of the cab ride, it's a brand new ESOP that definitionally I think had zero repurchase obligation. I was totally sure that I needed to know more about repurchase obligation and that it was going to be really critical for our company in the long term. It's probably going to be really critical for your companies long term. Once you get through the initial level of repurchase obligation, guess what? There's all kinds of other layers, and we've pursued a bunch of those at King Arthur, and I think it's really helped us understand how the math works. Don't fight the math, even if it's hard, even if, and I guess there's some kind of iterative math, which I always thought that's when the little thing on your spreadsheet comes up and saying, no, you can't do that. You can't have a self-referencing something or other. It's like, well, at some higher level of math, you can do it. And you ought to do it at the right time, because it will give you some insights into the math of your business and buying people out over 10 and 20 and 30 years that will be important if you care really about having your company succeed for decades to come. How am I doing on time? I'm about halfway? I think you're going to say yeah anyway. All right. Well, good, because halfway through I wanted to start talking about the future and what does the future hold. So this is obviously crystal ball stuff. Mine's no better than yours, but I do believe strongly that you don't go, oh, crystal ball, you can't do this, just throw your hands up and walk away from it. I think that's a failure. I think when I look at this, it's what data trends do we look at that we think are going to be most critical in the future of all the stuff that's out there, and we're overloaded with data, but which ones should we look at? And of the possible alternatives for future, whether it's employee ownership future or your business model future or your community's future, how do those trends affect these alternatives, and then what decisions does that suggest for me as a leader to make going forward? So I have a couple of things that come up. One is that 2 decades ago, and longtime ESOP Association members will remember this, we wrung our hands that the academic world really didn't care a hoot about employee ownership. I see Peter in the background there. He and I and others would go to business schools and we'd say, this is a really cool model. This is going to potentially help capitalism survive in a better and higher way than the track that it's on now. And they're like, no, this is fringe stuff. It's small. They just weren't interested. And it was in strategic plans to try to get an academic institution interested and involved. And now, today, in the last couple of years, Rutgers University holds an annual symposium where researchers, PhD, postdocs, 100 and more, come together every year to share their research on topics related to employee ownership. It has become, I don't think it's too much of an overstatement, a hotbed of research. Pat mentioned the research that's been going on for decades out there by a very few number, Kruse, Blasi, Friedman, that all point to the fact that done well, meaning participative culture, open book, those things as well, added to the employee ownership piece, you do way better if you have employee ownership there. Now there are hundreds of classes in universities on ESOPs. There is a website that came up to keep track of all the business school case studies on employee ownership. King Arthur's got one. I get dragged to kind of present to, and I'm happy to hand off to the King Arthur team, because you guys will be more current than me and are now, to kind of tell the story about King Arthur. This isn't just a kind of little storybook story. That's the jumping off point for business school professors playing one part of the room off against the other, having a real debate on, well, what really works about employee ownership here, and what are your problems? And you can imagine, there might be some future hedge fund kind of guys who aren't buying it, but then you have other people arguing with it. You have a great conversation. They're asking questions when they go through the King Arthur case of, would you invest in King Arthur flour if you could at the end of this, and get them to kind of support that? Does this model, employee ownership, only apply to niche companies, premium type companies, or is it available to a broader segment? It's not the answer so much that I care about. It's that this is happening with thousands and thousands of students when 2 decades ago we didn't think it was happening anywhere. It's building awareness, and that's fabulous. A decade ago, we didn't have B Corps. We didn't have benefit corporations. We had companies who were doing good things, not just a decade ago, but before that. But we also had the greenwashing. And so now we actually have ways of measuring, and it's not perfect, but it's way better than anything else that's out there, of how we're doing. We had a decade ago, maybe I'll exaggerate a little bit for effect, but we had some adversarial relationship with the government regulatory body on some of the employee ownership issues. And what happened last fall when the B Corporation's annual Champions Retreat was hosted by Vermont? Thank goodness it was last year, because B corporations are growing so quickly that there isn't a big enough part of Vermont that could hold the next Champions Retreat, so we had to get it in right away. U.S. Secretary of Labor Perez comes up and meets with a bunch of companies. Some of you were in the room here. Many of them were employee-owned. All of them were B Corporation. And there are leaders in this room who are working with the Department of Labor to really see if we can't get some support by administration, by the Secretary, to go behind this. Similar to how lucky we are in Vermont that we have Pat's leadership and Pat's belief that this is right. All right, so let's come into the present day and the tipping point that I'm arguing that we have here. B corporations aren't the last word. There will be knockoffs. There might be one now. I'd urge you, if you're a TED Talk lover, and even if you're not, I only watch one a month maybe just to give you a sense that I'm not constantly sitting in front of the screen looking at other people talking, but this is a good one. The guy's name is Paul Tudor Jones. He's probably one of the more wealthy individuals in the U.S., and the piece is called Why We Need to Rethink Capitalism. And in 10 minutes, he will give you a very, very interesting reason why, because of an overly financially laser-focused culture in our society for decades, because corporate profit share increases have actually not driven greater investments in community and employees. It's been the opposite. The percentage going to labor goes down, the CEO ones are going up. You know many of these. And he says, in history, these things have led to revolution and drastically higher taxes with dire economic consequences. And he says, that's not good. And anyway, I won't try to do the TED Talk for you. I will tell you that he is rolling out, and he'll tell you more about it if you watch it, in September of this year, something called the JUST Index. And it's going to be a ranking of 1,000 companies based on justice criteria, not by his measure, but by a survey of Americans, 20,000 Americans on justice. So this hardcore ex-cotton trader wants to put justice back on par with profit, and in so doing, bring humanity, his words, bring humanity back into business. All right, so I'm bringing this up. Remember I said trends and how this is affecting us? John?
I saw a bunch of people writing names. Why don't you take that guy's name again?
Paul Tudor Jones. Put another way, let's jump to like popular culture. Russell Crowe and the movie Gladiator, okay? Remember, how do I get my freedom? Win the mob, and you'll win your freedom. The mob are customers, consumers, and citizens who are just simply saying, this is not okay anymore, and it's not fringe, just like Aesop was accused of being fringe when we went to business schools. It's not fringe, this is trend, this is where it's going. We are winning the mob. This is going to become more and more important, and this is going to grow, and that's going to help our sustainability. A couple more quick little vignettes. If you are a history buff and you're interested in employee ownership, you absolutely have to have read Joe Blasi's book, A Citizen's Share. He makes a really wonderful argument. Again, if you're a history buff, otherwise, if you had a tough time in history and it was boring, don't go there. Ask for the Cliff Notes, or have a friend tell you about it. But the basic one is going back to before our country was a country, cod fishing fleets, employee ownership was a policy of the government. There was a recognition that this worked, and he takes it all the way through. And but for a couple of little, and I used the word before, sorry, cliche, tipping points, but for a couple things that didn't quite go our way, especially in the last 100 years, we as a society would be way further down the road for employee ownership broadly than we are today. Another thing, was it Woody Allen? About, success is mostly about just showing up and being there. Persistence, being there again. I think we're this close, tipping point. Another great story, you can find it on, Mary Joseph came up, maybe it was earlier before we started formally. She has a blog, Mary Joseph, Verit Advisors. On her blog, she has a story about two sisters, they might even be twins, who both work in grocery businesses, not in the executive suite, okay? Closer to bagging and checkout. One of them is an ESOP company. One of them is not. Guess what? The one in the ESOP company has an account that is valued in the millions of dollars. Okay? So this is getting out there. It's not just in business schools. It's not just in colleges. It's starting to become part of a broadly understood and known way of running a business, and more people know about it. It's increasing our awareness of the social inequity and ways out of it, and it's spawning, I believe, new employee ownership structures. There are areas that some of us here have talked about where we'd love to see employee ownership work better. Areas where it's not obvious that existing structures can make it work. Persistence, don't give up. I think there will be innovations coming up that will bring it to those fields. And in the area that I'm working in now, which is kind of social determinants of health and wellness and trying to stem some of the crazy spending for poor outcomes, I think there will be multi-stakeholder employee ownership-like ways of structuring things where an ROI, which would have any one of us in our companies dropping everything to go do and capture, in the health and wellness sphere, it's spread across multiple organizations, and people don't really understand it and get it, but it's just out there. How can we try to come together, maybe as citizen owners, to kind of capture those things? I think there are skills here in employee ownership that you're going to learn today and that you're going to learn through fighting those battles in your businesses that aren't just going to be good for you and making yourself more valuable and improved and more efficacious. Is that right? SAT word? All right. It's actually going to help the organization you work for. It's going to role model for the broader community. And I think we're going to actually start to find more glimmers of hope than we might be thinking about when we read the paper these days. So I'm going to wrap up. Should I be wrapping up now, or should I just BS for 5 minutes? Oh, yeah, questions. All right, so that was a little bit of the crystal ball. But could employee ownership just be a transitory phenomenon, a fad? Could regulatory changes actually work against us to kind of go after those who are abusing regulations and hurt, maybe unintentionally, the rest of us? Yeah, it could. But I think the forces that I mentioned and others are more of a sea change than a fad. And I think that's where the crystal ball says, yeah, you could be wrong, but this is pretty powerful stuff. It strikes me that the workforce increasingly values value-driven businesses. The number of bees and other type of collaborative multi-stakeholder measurements and communities is growing dramatically in number of countries and number of states. The research we've said is clear. Capital markets are innovating, and social impact bonds are moving out of just a buzzword where, go ahead, show me one, which was my answer 3 or 4 years ago, because I wanted to really see a real one rather than so I could see how it works. There are actually real ones now. And our common awareness of the problems that we're facing is growing, whether it's limits on water and carbon or the social inequities, the revolution, higher taxes, destroying economies type thing that Paul Tudor Jones will mention. I think all of these actually favor employee ownership and what we can bring to the country. Employee ownership for the long haul requires competence and compassion and commitment. This movement, and it is a movement, it's not just a technique, brings important skills that are needed. We should continue to learn from one another, build these skills. When you nail it, you're doing it for yourself, you're doing it for your community, and we're creating a wave that is just going to be fabulous. I think we could also see employee ownership spread to large companies in a much bigger way, as well as much smaller organizations that we've seen before. And I think for some of the bad actors out there, there may be a shot across the bow where within 5 years a corporate charter will be revoked for some of the corporations that are really making a bad name for themselves, making a bad name for all corporations. We've had a jump start in the employee ownership world with lots of great practices. Let's keep pace. Let's not fall back. Let's be happy to have company along for our journey and be proud that we were in the vanguard to start, and be determined to keep innovating. Keep learning from your network, and I look forward to learning from you when in the future some of you are going to be up here doing your keynote. So thank you very much.